Okay, guys, so we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to record these lectures and post them in Canvas. And then we're going to try it for this week, see if you guys like it, see if it works for you. Just kind of play around with it a little bit and see if we can figure out what works best for us as a class. So we're going to start out with chapter 4 in your medical terminology books. You can find this lecture in the file section of your theory shell, or you can look in your book. It's chapter 4, comprehensive medical terminology, whole body terms. So this is a bit of terminology. When we get done with this lecture, when you're done watching it, and you can go back and watch it again, you will need to complete the assignment for chapter 4. It's a quick test in Cengage. But don't stress about it. If you have questions, just let me know. And we'll go over all of this before I kind of release these assignments to you guys, okay? So let's just get started. So comprehensive medical terminology, chapter 4, whole body terms. Just for those of you that aren't or haven't been in my class yet, you're brand new, just know that your instructor screws words up all the time. So if I have a point where I kind of mess up a word, hopefully you get a little giggle out of it. So, okay, here we go. So the structural organization, and you have to remember when we do medical terminology, it's like a whole language in itself, right? So we're going to kind of go over that a little bit, but what we're talking about specifically is whole body terms, like what happens in our body, right? So the very most small structures in our body are cells, right? So then cells in turn group together and make up things that are tissues. And then tissues in turn into things like organs. So there are cells that make up the tissues that make up the organ of your heart or your stomach or your bladder, right? All of your muscles. So everything that's in us is made up of different cells, okay? This is a little diagram of a cell. It looks a little bit like a city. So here's my little pointer here. So this looks like I think it looks like a little like underwater city, you know. So this is the nucleus. So this is kind of the brain of the cell, right? And then we have kind of this cytoplasm that kind of makes up the bulk of that cell, kind of keeps everything nice and protected in there. And then this is the mitochondrion or the mitochondria. That's kind of the workhorse, kind of the power behind the cell. Okay. So there's millions and jillions of these things in our bodies and in every part of us. So the structural organization of organs. So organs are tissues that are arranged together to perform a particular function. And then we have all these different body systems, right? So different organs in our body make up different systems of our body. So a body system is an organization of different organs to perform functions of the whole body. So we have systems, tons of them in our body, right? So we have the integumentary system, which is like our nails, our skin, our hair, things like that. And we have our skeletal system, which is our bones, muscles and joints, right? We have muscles and joints all over our bodies. Our joints are kind of where our bones connect together. Then we have the nervous system. So the nervous system is all of those nerves. It makes our muscles twitch and move. It includes our brain, right? Kind of all of those involuntary movements like blinking and breathing and stuff like that. Then we have the cardiovascular system. So that has to do with our heart, the respiratory system, breathing, digestive system, making sure that our body breaks down food and gets the nutrients that we need. We have the urinary system. We have special senses. Anybody remember what the 5 senses are? I can always remember 4. I sometimes forget the 5. So we have touch, smell, sight, hearing, and taste, right? Okay, so then we have the endocrine system. So that's glands. So think of like the thyroid gland, right? And then we have the blood and lymphatic system, and then our male and female reproductive system. So terms relating to cells. So this is kind of when we get into terminology, right? So this is a word part, plasia. Okay, so plasia, plasia. And when we add different prefixes and suffixes to it, it maybe changes the meaning of that word, right? Um, so plasia means, anybody want to take a guess? Plasia means growth. So growth or like multiplication of something, right? So if we take, for example, this word part, plasia, and then this prefix a. So a means, in medical terminology, that means without or none or no, right? So aplasia means there's no growth. Okay. Dysplasia, means like painful or struggled or something like that, right? So this would be like a painful or a struggle of growth. Hyper and hypo, these are like opposites of each other. So hyper meaning up or excessive, right? So this would be excessive growth. Hypo is like slow or delayed, right? So or low. So this would be slow growth. And then neo means new, and plasia meaning growth, so that's new growth. Okay, so that's a little bit um, of word terminology. All right, so we have all kinds of different types of tissues. We have connective tissues, so these tissues help to support and bind our body tissue. And then we have epithelial tissues, which cover the internal and external organs. So the biggest example of this is your skin, right? We have epithelial cells or epithelial tissues that make up our skin. And then there's three different types of muscles. We have the skeletal muscles, so these attach to the bone. Then we have smooth or visceral muscles, and this is in the walls of hollow internal organs. Okay. And then we have cardiac muscles. So this is the smooth or visceral. So this is, think of your esophagus, right? So your esophagus has little muscles in it that help your food to go down whenever you swallow. And then cardiac muscles, that's the muscular wall of the heart. And then we have our nervous system. So this transmits impulses, right? So when we pick something up or we make a fist or we raise our hand, right? Our nervous system is telling our muscles what to do. So question, the blank are the smallest structural units leading up to blank, which perform important bodily functions. So remember what we talked about at the beginning. What is the smallest structural unit? And then what does that eventually lead up to that performs bodily functions? Okay, let's see what it is. So it's cells and body systems. So the smallest is structure is a cell, right? And then it leads up to body systems that help to our body to perform. Another question, of the four types of tissue, how many do you think are involved in a body system such as the digestive system? 4, 3, 2, or none? So remember, we have all those tissues, those connective tissues, the epithelial tissues, muscles, nervous, right? So you'll need epithelial, so it's 4. Good. So you need epithelial tissue to create the organ structure themselves. The muscle tissue is needed to move through the organs and out of the body. The nervous tissue is required to stimulate the muscle activity, and the connective tissue is needed to hold the structures in the body cavities. So you do need all 4 of those, and they're all 4 actually involved in each of the 13 body systems. Good job. Okay, so now we're going to talk about body planes. So we have a mid-sagittal. So I'm going to kind of explain it, and then there's a picture on the next slide, and we'll look at it a little bit closer. So mid-sagittal, so we have the vertical plane, right? So think of vertical, right, going up and down, and horizontal going from side to side. So mid-sagittal is a vertical plane, and it divides the body into equal right and left portions. So if I took a marker and I made a mark all the way down my forehead, down my nose, between my lips, right? So right, and down my chin and down my neck, down my chest, right? It would divide me completely in half. So that's a mid-sagittal plane. And that's the midline of the body, right? And then, so that line is the medial line. So that's the mid part of your body. And then anything away from that line is lateral to that line. Okay. So just like this. So this is the mid-sagittal plane. It cuts this cute little girl here right in half, right, from left to right. And then this is the medial line of her body. So the medial line of her body, and then anything away from that. So her hand is lateral to that midline. Okay. Then we have a frontal plane. So again, this is a vertical plane. It divides the body into front and back portions, and it's also known as the coronal plane. So again, this is going right down the middle of the head, right? And it cuts our body in half the other way, so from front to back. So this is when we get into the term of anterior and posterior, right? So anterior is the front part of the body, and the posterior is the back part of the body. Then we have a transverse plane. So the other planes we talked about were vertical. This is a horizontal plane, right? So it cuts right across the body, usually kind of at the midsection of your body. So, and you'll hear this a little bit later, but your belly button or your umbilicus is kind of that landmark, right? But it can cut pretty much at any point in your body. So it cuts across the body. And then we start talking about terms superior and inferior. So wherever that plane cuts, right? So we'll just say it cuts right at the belly button. Anything above that plane is superior, right? So that's towards the head. That's what that means, right? Cranial, cephalic, right? And then inferior is anything below that. So caudal, which means like the tail of something or the bottom of something. So this is just exactly like that. So that cuts pretty much right at the diaphragm area, right? So anything above that is superior. So you could say your head is superior to your hands, or you could say your nose is superior to your toes, right? Or you could say your eyes are superior to your chin, right? Or we could say things like our knees are inferior to our elbows. Okay, so it's kind of those different types of terms. So true or false, a frontal view is when you divide the body into equal left and right portions. What do you guys think? True or false? That would be false. So frontal is looking at the front of something. So it divides the body into front and back portions. Good job. So question, true or false? A radiologist dictates a craniocaudal view was performed. This means the film was shot from the top of the head downward toward the tail. What do you guys think? True or false? That is true. So cranial means skull, right? And caudal means tail. So it goes from the top to the bottom. Good. And then we have body regions. So we have 9 different abdominal regions. So these are identified from left to right, and they're one row at a time, and it goes from the top to the bottom. So the next picture will kind of explain that. So from right to left, right? So we have this from top to bottom, top to bottom. Again, here's that umbilicus region, right? So that's where our belly button would lie, okay? So these are our regions, okay? And our different organs lie in different parts of these regions, right? So like our digestive system would be part of region 8, and our liver would be in region 1 and region 2, right? So it's something just to kind of think of how the body's divided. So the landmark, again, like I said earlier, is your umbilicus or your navel. Okay, so think of umbilical cord, umbilicus, right? And then we have those quadrants. We have the right upper quadrant, the left upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, and the left lower quadrant. Those are the abbreviations for those. And if you've ever had appendicitis yourself, or maybe know somebody that does, you have that McBurney's point. That's kind of something that's kind of prevalent when it comes to that. So we'll kind of learn a little bit more about that when we go on. So this picture just shows those quadrants, the abdominal quadrants, okay? So the umbilicus is our landmark, right? So we kind of make a a cross section there, right? So kind of divide that into planes, right? So then we have the right upper quadrant, okay? The right lower quadrant, there's that little, there's that appendix, right? The left upper quadrant, okay? And the left lower quadrant, okay? So looking at the diagram of the 9 body regions, so I'll go back here in just a minute. What number would be the right lumbar region? So we go back to this one, the right lumbar region. It's this one right here. So you have to remember that you're kind of looking in a mirror, right? So if we were facing the same way as our model, we would be exact right and left. But we're looking kind of at a mirrored image. So her right side is our left side, right? So it would be this one right here. Okay, so let's go forward and see if I'm right. Good. So remember, you're looking at a mirror image, so the direction is the opposite of what you see on the page. Good job. Okay, true or false? McBurney's point is the landmark for the 4 abdominal quadrants. What do you guys think? True or false? That's false. It's the umbilicus, or your belly button, or your navel. That's the center of the outer square of all 4 quadrants. Good job. So then we have body cavities. So we have the ventral cavity. So this is kind of that main part of your body, right? So it's that your thorax, or your thoracic cavity, where all your major organs are, your abdominal cavity and your pelvic cavity, okay? And then we have the dorsal cavity. So when I think of the word dorsal, I think of dorsal fin, right? So like on a whale or a dolphin, and that's kind of on their back, right? So that's the cavity that holds the cranial cavity, which is like your head and your brain, right? And then your spinal cavity. So this is your cranial cavity and your spinal cavity, right? And then this is your ventral cavity. So it has your pelvis, your abdominal cavity, and your thoracic cavity here. Okay. All right. So true or false, the body region located in front of the spine is considered to be within the ventral cavity. What do you guys think? That's true. So only the brain and the spine are in the dorsal cavity. Good job. All right, another question. The blank cavity is separated from the blank cavity by the diaphragm. What do you guys think? So if we go back, okay, so this is the diaphragm here, right? So this kind of holds all these organs down here, helps with breathing, all of that stuff, the respiratory system. Okay, so let's go look at the question again. So the blank cavity is separated from the blank cavity by the diaphragm. Let's see. That would be B. So the thoracic and abdominal cavities are separated by the diaphragm, the muscle that aids in the respiratory process. Good job. All right, so then we have divisions of the back, and I will have my little fun skeleton friend. What are we going to name him now? Leon. We'll name him Leon. And we'll kind of go over this when we're in class on campus. Okay. So we have the cervical vertebrae, right? So these are kind of towards the head. You have your thoracic vertebrae, which is the largest part of your spine. So that's T1 through T12. And then the lumbar vertebrae. So think of lumbar, think of like a lazy boy recliner, right? It has lumbar support. So that's the lower part of your spine. So that's L1 through L5. And then we have our sacrum and our coccyx. So our sacrum's kind of like our pelvic bones, right? That type of structure. And then the coccyx is your tailbone. So here's a little diagram of that. So here's the cervical vertebrae. Kind of keep your head in place, right? The thoracic vertebrae. And then the lumbar vertebrae. And then, and then this is your sacrum and your coccyx, right? So this is a vertebral body. That's the bony part of your vertebrae. This little lamina, which I'll show you when we have Leon, the skeleton, in front of us, is a little like T-shaped protrusion, bony protrusion that makes up helps make up the vertebrae. And then we have these discs. So if you've ever heard of anybody that has back trouble that has like a bulging disc or a slipped disc or something, that's what they're talking about, is this little section right here. Okay. So true or false, as long as you know where the divisions are in the spine, you can count from either the top or the bottom to correctly identify each vertebra. What do you guys think? True or false? That's true. So for instance, T12 could be found by counting from the cervical vertebrae, but it's much closer to start with the lumbar at L5 and work your way up. Good job. All right, so then we're going to talk about directional terms. So superficial versus deep. So superficial is something that's on the top or near the surface, right? And the opposite of that is something that's deep. So whenever you think of this term, I usually think of like when we're drawing blood, right? So you may have a superficial vein at the top that you can see. Like if you guys have drawn my blood, kind of that big blue vein I have in my arm, that's a superficial vein, right? Compared to some veins that are a little bit deeper in the arm and in the tissue of the arm, okay? And then we have anterior versus posterior. So anterior meaning the front, right? And posterior meaning the back. And then we have ventral and dorsal, again, front and back, right? And then we have superior versus inferior. So again, remember when we divide in that plane, that horizontal plane, anything above that is superior, anything below that is inferior, right? And then cranial versus caudal. So what does cranial mean? It means skull, so towards the skull, versus caudal, which means tail, so down, right? Good. So this is kind of both of those planes on one picture, right? So we have the coronal plane here, right? Divides us from front to back. And then we have this horizontal plane here that divides us from top to bottom, right? So this, anything above here is cranial, anything below here is caudal, right? Anything in front of it is ventral, anything behind it is dorsal. So again, I know it's funny, but word association really helps whenever it comes to medical terminology. Dorsal, I think dorsal fin. So I know that a dorsal fin is on the back of a dolphin, right? So that's how I remember that. All right, so then we have directional terms. So medial versus lateral. So medial is towards the midline of our body, right? So towards our belly button. Anything away from that is lateral, right? So if we put our hand out, we could say that our hand is lateral to our stomach, right? Something like that. And then we have distal and proximal. So again, word association, right? So distal, think of distance, right? So something that's further away. Proximal, meaning it's in a, an approximate place, or in a in proximity to something. So that's close, right? And then we have supine versus prone. So supine is when something is facing up, and prone is when something's facing down. And again, supination and pronation is the kind of action of that, right? And then plantar versus dorsal. So again, let's think of a foot. Okay, so if my, I know this sounds weird, stick with me. I promise it'll make sense. So if you think of a foot, right? If my foot was a dolphin, I know I'm dumb, but just think about it. Where would the dorsal fin be? It would be on the top of my foot, right? So that's the dorsal portion of my foot. And then plantar would be the bottom of my foot. So if you've ever heard the term plantar fasciitis, right? Somebody's flat-footed, that's how I remember plantar. Okay, here's just another guy. Okay, so something that is proximal is the nearest point of attachment, excuse me, and then something that is distal is the furthest point of attachment. Okay, we again have that midline, right? So medial means something towards the midline, and lateral means something away from the midline. Good job. All right, common nouns can help in keeping directional terms straight. For instance, something in close proximity is blank, and something that is in the distance is blank. So again, let's kind of talk through it. It's that word association, right? So something that is in close proximity is proximal, right? And then something that's in the distance is distal. So I'm going to say it's D. What do you guys think? Yay! So word associations make it easier for terms to be remembered. And you guys will find your own, or you can use mine, whatever you want to do. All right, and that's it on that one. Okay, so like I said, whenever you get done with this, you need to do the test yourself on chapter 4. It's in your theory shell in module 1. If you have any questions, just let me know. Talk to you guys in a little bit.